I think a lot of us don't recognize that our emotions are a physiological symptom.
When we're eating right, when we're being temperate about how we're handling these things and being good stewards, there's an obedience that opens up, right?
She said, in the last few months, I've dropped 30 pounds. I have prioritized my sleep. I've become far more physically active. But the biggest thing that has changed is that I feel closer to God.
I'm Kurt Luthart, your host and founder of the Prosper Group, a marketing agency that's helped raise over $1 billion and helped elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. Business owners, what if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into a lucrative and engaged audience of 76.5 million people that we call Liberty Spenders? Liberty Spenders are Americans who spend $5 trillion a year and are motivated to buy from businesses that share their values. If you want to learn more, you can get access to our new best-selling book at libertyspenders.com/free. I'm really excited because today we're joined by Eric Collett, CEO of A Mind for All Seasons. It's a company that's revolutionizing cognitive and mental health across the U.S. Eric's a renowned speaker. He's a brain health expert and a licensed residential care administrator. Eric, he's been transforming lives since the year 2000 with innovative dementia care and leadership strategies. And I remember, Eric, doing our first call and getting super excited about having you on because of the cool work you're doing in this space. So we're so happy to have you.
Oh, thanks, Kurt. I'm really excited to be with you today.
Yeah. I mean, brain health, it's something that I remember when I first heard people talk about it, brain health or exercising your brain. And I'm thinking, this seems weird. I get the idea of doing push-ups or running to exercise your body. Exercising your brain sounded weird or maybe a little made up. But in recent years, I've seen how important it is. Perhaps it's because I'm getting older. And you've talked about how working on and improving brain health can open up a lot of incredible opportunities in your life. What's that look like? What's that? Explain this whole concept to us, I think, to start with.
Yeah, I think that's a great question to start with because one of the awkward things in my field is that if you talk about brain health, a lot of people don't really connect the dots. They don't understand what that means for them. But everybody knows things like Alzheimer's disease is horrific and I'm terrified of it and I don't want to get that. Everybody knows that if your mental health is not going very well, it's going to affect your performance. But let me see if I can connect the dots just a little bit more. Several years ago, I learned something from a client that kind of opened my eyes to maybe how to talk about this. This was a business leader from the Atlanta area. And he had been working with me for a few months. And we had done a lot of blood work. We had done cognitive testing. We had done the steps that we use in a process that we call the enhanced protocol to help him improve his cognitive and mental health. And a few months into it, I was on a coaching call with him, and he had shown noticeable improvement. His cognitive scores were up dramatically. And as I was chatting with him, he said, you know what, Eric, as a business executive, I honestly thought that I needed to read David Allen's great book on productivity another time because I just wasn't getting as much done in the day. I thought that it was an issue of not learning as much as I needed to about productivity. And he said, now I see it totally different. I realize that I just needed to get my processing speed up about 30%, and I'm getting so much more done in the day. And he said, then he said the key thing that stood out to me. He said, Eric, I think you guys just gave me a hardware upgrade. And I went, oh, that's a really good analogy because everyone knows what happens if you try to load new software on crummy old hardware. Like my wife has this old iPad it's really old. It's outdated. I'm amazed that it still functions. And you can't even upgrade the software now because the hardware is so old. If you think of your brain as like the hardware And everything that you're learning, whether it's the book that you're studying or the workshop that you're going to or the podcast that you're listening to, that's like software. And we need to pay attention to both software and hardware. So when it comes to brain health, we all need the best functioning hardware possible. And that's what my team and I help people do.
Yeah. Oh, I like the analogy. I get that right away. And so I wanted to back up though a little bit, because I remember from talking before your story about how you got into this and how this evolved. So take us through the story of Eric. What happened to get you here to this focus on brain health?
Well, for starters, when I was a teenager and I was really worried about what was I going to do in life, because I was just curious about everything. I love to learn. That's like one of the most important things people could know about me. I just have always enjoyed learning and geeking out over stuff. And so I was talking to my mom one day and she said, Eric, I have a strong feeling that the work that you will do has not even been invented yet. So just keep learning. Just stay curious. And that in and of itself was amazing advice. And I would share that with anybody, because the world's changing so much right now. Just stay curious, stay flexible, keep learning. But by the time I got into college, I thought I was going to be a reconstructive plastic surgeon at first, and then a whole lot of story down the road. We'll leave that as water under the bridge. But I pivoted and I studied interpersonal and group communication and psychology, and then stumbled into a job in assisted living, which put me in contact with a lot of people living with Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases, which sparked the desire to go back to something that I had studied in high school, which was, well, what are the root causes of these diseases? And then I kept learning more. And then after a 16-year career running assisted living and memory care communities and seeing exactly what these kinds of diseases do to people, I was primed to start a business to do something about that and to help family and professional caregivers. But I couldn't see how to do it. I was on call 24/7. I was a father of 4. My wife has an eye disease that had robbed her of peripheral vision, and she had to quit driving in her mid-30s. So I was the sole driver. I had a lot of stuff going on. And I'll take you back to the moment where all of this really started. So there I was, driving the family to a school play for one of my daughters, and the phone rang. And it was the memory care community where I was the executive director. And I heard this very distressed team member saying, Eric, we need you. And I said, well, what's going on? We had a resident who had been on hospice services, but was not expected to die quite so soon. And she had had a sudden turn. She was actively dying. Her family was in distress. There was nobody else to be there to support the family and comfort them. It was after hours. So I dropped off my family at the school play, not even really knowing how they were going to get home. And I spent the next 15 minutes driving to the facility, feeling like the worst husband and father imaginable, because it felt like I was kind of abandoning my family. And then I spent the next few hours feeling like the worst possible executive director of this memory care community, because I was resenting being with that family. And I was trying to put on a good face, but it was exhausting.
Right.
And I got home that night really late. The whole family was in bed. And I looked in the mirror and I thought, you're going to die an early death if you keep this up. And so the next morning I talked to my wife and I said, honey, I have to do something different. She said, Eric, you've been talking about starting a business for years. You grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. What is stopping you? And I said, when am I going to have time to start this? And she just took a deep breath. And that's when it's like the clouds parted, the light came down, the answer rained down on me. And she said, have you ever thought that maybe you need to quit your day job so you have time to start a business? Well, that was it. Like 3 days later, I gave notice, and here we are over 9 years later. I'm so grateful that I took the flying leap.
Yeah. Yeah. So many of us have those crazy sort of entrepreneurial stories where you sort of jump off the cliff, right? You're giving up your dependable source of income to go do something new and innovative that may not, could take years to replace the income that you were making before. But that's where new innovations come from.
I thought at the time that I was giving up security and predictability. And I guess to an extent that I was. And I told myself, oh, I'm a licensed administrator. I'm in demand. I was very successful at what I did. And I thought, well, if this doesn't work, I could go back to it. And then 6 months in, I realized, oh my gosh, you burned the boats. You can never go back, because I got to experience what it was like to live without a ceiling, what it was like to be able to pivot and to learn and to grow. And I changed so much that I just never could go back.
Yeah. Well, hopefully the world is a much better place because you're out doing something in the private sector and, really helping people with their brain health. And you work through something you call the enhanced protocol. So what is that? What's that look like for somebody who you work with?
So the enhanced protocol initially started out by leveraging research that had come out of UCLA and Cornell University and some other research institutions to try to help people living with Alzheimer's and other dementia illnesses to improve their symptoms. But we had so much success doing that in a pilot project in Arizona that the family members of the people who were living in memory care were coming to us saying, oh my goodness, you just helped my dad add 15 points on a 30-point cognitive test in a matter of months, after 3 different neurologists have said, I'm sorry, there's nothing that I could do for you. If you can help his brain, what could you do for my brain? And so that just sort of morphed into an organized process that allows us to help people of all different ages improve cognitive and mental health. So maybe I'll walk you through just a quick summary of exactly what that looks like. So this is a very objective way of approaching brain health. So what we do is start with a baseline cognitive test. And we use a test that was developed at Stanford. It's been administered over 20 million times in the last 2 decades. So there's a lot of data points to compare to. It's like a fine-toothed comb to look at every aspect of your brain's functioning. So we do the test. We gather health history. We send you to the local LabCorp or Quest. So wherever you are in the country, we can send you to get some blood work. And we look at way more than you'd have looked at in a primary care visit. So we're talking nutrients, hormones, genetics, inflammatory markers, metabolic factors, etc. When all of that data comes back, our medical director, who's one of the world's top experts on neurodegenerative diseases and brain health, analyzes all that, writes a personalized treatment summary that says, hey, here are all of the factors that are affecting your brain performance today, and they're also risk factors for how your brain's going to do down the road, because we want to pay attention to all of that. And he says, here's exactly what to do to start correcting anything. If you've got some genetic issues, here's how we work around that. And then we coach people through how to apply those interventions. And a few months down the road, we remeasure things. We want to know objectively, are you getting better? And we consistently see when people apply these things, they get really good results. Like I had a client named Adam, who's regional practice manager at Epic Insurance Brokers, who posted on, just a few days ago, about a week ago on LinkedIn, his journey, where when he started working with the Mind for All Seasons, his overall neurocognition index, kind of the overall, how's your brain performing, was in the 68th percentile. Several months later, he'd raised it to the 88th percentile. And now, about 18 months later of really prioritizing the things that we found in his blood work that he needs to do, he scores in the 99th percentile. And what that translates into is, I am more productive at work. I'm accomplishing more than I've ever done. My mental health is better. I feel like I can get done with a really busy workday and still have gas in the tank to play with my kids. So this has direct impact on a person's quality of life.
Interesting. That idea of having more gas in the tank to play with kids, I think of that as a cardio thing, or a something with, do I exercise enough? I'm tired because I'm old. So whereas you're pointing out the fact that it could just be like you've exhausted your brain health, or how does that, when you're talking about, fixing your brain makes you more able to play with your kids or engage with your kids. That's an interesting connection that I wouldn't have thought of.
Let's unpack that a little bit, Kurt. Let's let's talk in layman's terms about how the cellular engine works, because the reality is you can't make a brain better without making everything in the whole physical system better. The body is a system of systems. Everything works together, and we have to pay attention to all of that. So people improve overall in their health and their energy when we do work on the brain. So what does that look like? I'll give you an analogy. Most people are familiar with steamships that crisscrossed the waters of the world back in the 1800s. And in those steamships, there was an engine room with a coal-fired furnace and a guy shoveling coal in. And in order for him to do his job, he needed three things. You got to feed him regularly, or he's just going to run out of energy. You have to keep him well hydrated. That's a hot space. He's sweating like crazy. So fluid and electrolytes matter. And you have to have an exhaust system that works, because if carbon monoxide from that furnace backs up, he's going to drop dead eventually. Now imagine that engine room is like every cell in your body. And the guy shoveling coal in that furnace, that's like our mitochondria. Back in high school biology, we all learned that mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. And that's true of most of the cells in our body. Most of our cells have between 200 and 2,000 mitochondria. And as we age, we tend to lose mitochondria unless we're doing the things that allow us to have more and bigger and healthier mitochondria. So if your energy is low, and that could be throughout your whole body or in certain parts of your brain, the question is it a fuel problem? Is it a hydration problem? Is it an exhaust problem? So fuel problem, hey, what are we eating? How responsive are we to insulin signaling? Can we get gas into the tank so that those mitochondria can burn it and create ATP, which is energy? Is it a hydration problem? If your electrolytes are off, it's going to goof up your brain functioning. I once took care of a lady in memory care who had a psychological condition called polydipsia, where people are motivated to drink and drink and drink and drink. And it's crazy how much water they'll drink. And she diluted her salt so much that she could have died. But instead, she started hallucinating. And she literally called the local emergency number and said, excuse me, there are 12 dead bodies in my front yard. Will someone please come and clean them up? And by the time they got there, which was pretty fast, they had to break down the front door. They found her passed out on the living room floor. She was near death, and it took them 3 days at the hospital to rebalance her fluid and electrolytes. So that's a big issue. As far as exhaust, just running the cellular engine, just living, produces a type of exhaust. You might call it oxidative stress or reactive oxygen species. This is the exhaust from running the cellular engine. But there are also outside sources of exhaust. So let me tie this together to energy and brain health. Last summer in Boise, Idaho, where I live, there was something that happened environmentally that started affecting me personally. I woke up one day with brain fog. I just felt so sluggish. I had very low energy. And so I asked myself these three things that we've been talking about. Is it a fuel problem? No, I haven't changed my diet at all. I'm super dialed in on what I eat. I know how to fuel my body for success. It wasn't a hydration issue. I was really consistent with that. So that leaves exhaust. And I said, what's going on? And I realized, we've got a bunch of forest fires burning. And the city of Boise is like a sea of smoke. You couldn't see more than a quarter mile. And I was breathing that stuff all day long. Well, that's increased oxidative stress. And the way that your body neutralizes that is antioxidants. So I was sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've got increased inflammation at the cellular level. What can I do about that? Glutathione is one of the most important antioxidants in the body. Well, I keep on hand a bottle of liquid glutathione for times like this. And I took 10 milliliters in the morning, and 30 minutes later, it was like someone flipped a switch. My energy came back up.
Yeah.
Because I just needed more antioxidant support to deal with that increased exhaust that was building up. So that's what I did. That became my strategy every day for the next couple of months until all those forest fires quit burning. And I could go back to a different strategy. So when you know those things, hey, you can clear the brain fog, but it also means that your entire body works better. You have way more energy. So hopefully that helps to tie all that together a little bit.
It does, because, it's easy not to see all these things as connected, right? I know in some of our some of the stuff I've read or we've bantered back and forth about, you've talked about a really powerful idea, which I know my audience will care about, that brain health can really help deepen our relationship with God. And I'd love to talk about that, because that's one area where I'm motivated. So talk a little bit about the connection there.
I have felt this in my own life all along, that when my body's working well, when I'm healthy, that I feel closer to God. But one of the great joys of the last 9 years is watching that play out in the lives of other people. So, for example, a few years ago, I was the keynote speaker at all three of National Healthcare Corporation's leadership conferences. They've got a very big company, publicly traded, and so they bring together like 1,000 people at a time, 3 times throughout the year to deal with different regions. And so I was at, I think it was the second of the 3 presentations. So I'd already presented once a few months earlier. And literally 20 minutes before I was getting on stage, I got an email from a lady that had attended that first leadership conference. And she said, Eric, I just want to follow up with you and let you know what happened. You don't know me. I was one of the faces in the crowd. I was in the audience there. And she said, you talked about reevaluating our relationship with our spouse, our relationship with God, and our relationship with ourselves, how we were treating ourselves. And I didn't specifically call that out. I don't remember exactly what I said in that presentation. I must have said something that sparked that for her. Or maybe it was just the Holy Spirit speaking to her and saying, I think you need to see it this way. I don't know. But that was her takeaway. And she said, Eric, I went back and I reevaluated my life. And I felt like I had a great relationship with my spouse and children. And I felt like I had a really good relationship with God, but I realized I'd been neglecting myself. She was a nurse, and she said, I was so busy putting on everyone else's oxygen masks that I wasn't putting on my own. And I needed to lose weight. I needed to eat better. I needed to be more physically active. I needed to prioritize my sleep, etc. And she said, what I was not counting on is how much closer to God I would feel when I did those things. She said, in the last few months, I've dropped 30 pounds. I have prioritized my sleep. I've become far more physically active. But the biggest thing that has changed is that I feel closer to God. I thought that was profound. That was such a great example of the idea that when our bodies are working really well, I think it allows the Spirit to speak to us more. I think it's easier to sense that delicate connection. And as I reflected on it, I've realized so many of the things that the adversary would use to derail us in life have to do with temptations of the physical body. And when the physical body is screaming at us, it's harder to maintain that delicate connection to the things of God. But when the body is working really optimally, I think it's easier to just set that aside and really connect with the divine.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about that I'm still trying to understand, but I think it's a profound truth.
Yeah. Well, I've often recognized, since you brought up spouse, right, that if I'm being unhealthy, that generally creates sluggishness. You talked about brain fog in your experience. I'm overtired. I'm a little grumpy because my stomach feels a little upset because I ate way too much of whatever that thing was. And then that comes out in the way I treat my spouse, right? When I'm in a bad state, I'm more likely to be grumpy at her for no good reason, right? She didn't do anything. She didn't say anything. I'm just feeling bad and I'm going to be grumpy. And so just the idea of being in good health, I think to some extent at the very base level, you just feel better, right? And when you feel better, you connect with your spouse and with God better. But I do think there's probably a correlation even on, say, the obedience level. It's when we're eating right, when we're being temperate about how we're handling these things and being good stewards, there's an obedience that opens up, right? We probably in the church talk about a lot of sin in our life that people who steal, kill, and destroy, and we sometimes ignore other things like gossip and gluttony. right?
Yeah.
So I know that's something I am on a little health journey myself with the same conviction. Like one of the ways to honor God is to honor my body and to not be gluttonous and not eat a whole pint. I eat a whole half gallon of ice cream, which tastes great, but always makes me feel feel bad later. So I think there is something there.
Yeah.
And
I love the word that you used, which is stewardship.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody necessarily thinks of their body as a stewardship, but I believe that our bodies are not ours. They were bought with a price.
Mm-hmm.
And if we honor that, then it's a stewardship and we take it seriously because it's about something way more than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that to me is motivating.
Hey, business owners, did you know there's 76.5 million faith-based and conservative consumers that are looking to support brands that align with their values?
That's a $5 trillion opportunity. And if you're not tapping into it, you're leaving money on the table. Our new book, Liberty Spenders, is your ultimate guide to reaching this influential audience using conviction-driven marketing.
That's right. We break down real-world strategies that successful brands are using right now to connect with this audience authentically, build trust, and drive long-term business growth.
So if you're truly serious about standing out in today's crowded market, grab your copy today on Amazon or visit libertyspenders.com. And don't miss out on this revolutionary strategy called conviction-driven marketing. Yeah. Well, I was also, on this thread, I also listened recently to a great sermon. Speaking of Arizona, there's a church there in Scottsdale area, the Pillar Church. And I really love the pastor there. One of the pastors, Preston Robinson, I think. He did a sermon on, sort of idols in our life. And they can be things like making money. But one of the unexpected things he brought up was food can become an idol because we use it to cope with mental and emotional challenges. I feel bad, and so cheeseburgers gives me a quick pick-me-up for a short time instead of actually dealing with whatever the problem is or going to God with whatever that is. And that was a unique perspective to me because it takes the thought of not taking care of my body also a little bit above just being a bad discipline to, hey, this is something that's also impacting on the negative. So if the being healthier brings me closer to God, then conversely, not being healthy takes me further away,
I think part of what I hear you saying, Kurt, is that when you ask yourself a question like, what is my goal in eating this thing? Or what job have I hired this food to do? It changes the internal dynamics. We're not just acting based on pure emotion. We start to become more intentional. And if you think about it, you would never go to a gas station with your vehicle and decide, you know what, soda's cheaper than gasoline or diesel, whatever your vehicle runs on. I think I'm just going to pour some root beer or whatever it is into the gas tank. Nobody would ever do that because you'd ruin your vehicle. Why do we treat our cars better than we treat our bodies? Because sometimes we say, I'll just, sounds good and it's cheap and I'm looking for a quick fix right now. And I'm going to pour a lesser fuel into my body. I think when we start asking ourselves, what am I trying to accomplish with this meal? What's the outcome that I want? It starts to shift the dynamic. We start to become living by design instead of just by default. And we think about what we're doing.
Yeah. I like that question. I've never asked that question. What have I hired this food to do? And I've listened to different talks on health, et cetera. I love that perspective. And something that we should popularize.
There's one other thing that you mentioned earlier, Kurt, that I think is really important not to gloss over. I think this is actually huge for people. And it's a lesson that I learned from a client. But the lesson, I'll go straight to it, is this. Do not confuse what you feel with who you are. You talked about emotions. You talked about taking better care of yourself and how that affects your relationship with your spouse. And I could say by extension, it affects all of our relationships. But I think a lot of us don't recognize that our emotions are a physiological symptom. We think that our emotions are just who we are. Oh, I'm just this way. And maybe we think, okay, yeah, I got to work on that, but this is who I am. I have watched so many people transform in terms of how they show up from moment to moment as their brain health improved. So, for example, one of my clients is Gary Plummer. He's been super vocal about it. Gary Plummer played for the San Francisco 49ers for years. He's got a Super Bowl ring. And when he got done with the NFL, he was not doing well at all. Cognitively, things were slipping and he knew it. Emotionally, he could go from zero to fighting mad, bam, just like that, the drop of a hat. Why is that? Well, it's not because he was broken. It's not because he's a deficient human being. It's not because he's just a rage machine and this is his identity. That is a symptom that the frontal part of the brain is not producing good energy, because that's the governor. That's what allows us to have emotional stability. That's what allows us to focus and concentrate and to have reasoning and planning and judgment. And Gary had all sorts of symptoms related to low energy in the frontal lobe. Well, when we did blood work and we measured the root cause issues and we addressed those and we calmed the fire that was perpetually burning in his frontal lobe, because he's estimated that he had over 2,000 concussions in a 13-year NFL career. When we did that work, no longer did he go from zero to fighting mad at the drop of a hat. No longer was he perpetually in brain fog. No longer was he having migraines every day of his life. All of that went away. Same person, but he was experiencing the world emotionally very differently. So if we can learn to look at what we're feeling as a symptom of our physiology, I think it keeps us more grounded. And we don't have to like what we feel. We don't have to hope that we just continue feeling that way. It doesn't have to be our identity. We can have a better version of ourselves when we really focus on root cause issues that affect how the brain operates.
I'm going to murder a C.S. Lewis quote that I once heard, because he talks about this concept of not confusing our feelings about our spiritual walk with reality and trusting in something deeper. And he says something about how, our feelings can be affected simply by eating a really bad piece of meat the night before. And then we make some decision, or we judge something in our spiritual life because we don't feel good about it. But to your point, it can be a physiological issue. I did think it was really excited. 9-year anniversary. So you're almost a decade into a Mind for All Seasons. What's a big lesson you've learned just running the business for 9 years?
I love that question. I've learned so much in the last 9 years, but I think the biggest thing that I could articulate it before, but when you live something, you know it at a deeper level. And I have learned what it is to live by faith. That faith is a principle of action and of power, that it requires moving forward. And there are so many situations in the last 9 years where I didn't know how we were going to take the next step, but I had to just act. I had to do something to move forward. And great things have come from consistently doing that. So, for example, our work I mentioned earlier really started focused on seniors. We were trying to revolutionize assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care, et cetera. And the enhanced protocol was originally developed as an organized way to help those residents living in those types of communities. And when COVID hit, everything fell apart. We couldn't even go in the communities that we were working in. We literally lost 3/4 of our revenue overnight. And we had just opened a new office. We'd invested 6 figures in equipment. We had hired new staff. We were building out a brain therapy studio as a proof of concept location. And I found myself literally just a few months after we opened that, we were starting to ramp all that up, faced with no revenue coming in. I didn't take a paycheck for almost a year. And I sat in the office one day, all the staff were working remotely, and I was just staring out the window at the golf course behind the office, just pondering, praying, thinking. And I asked myself the question, what would have to be true for me to look back and honestly say that the COVID pandemic was the very best thing that happened to a Mind for All Seasons. And that turned out to be a really good question, because as I pondered it, then eventually I had an insight that was almost like God's finger writing words in my mind. And the words were, cast your net on the other side of the boat. And I realized, we had seen for a long time that we could build out a private client services model and serve people individually, regardless of where they lived in the country, because we already had these national contracts with the labs. And I realized, well, the time frame has changed. It's time to do that now. And that was what we could focus on. And so we went all in on building that and growing that. And then once things kind of eased up with the pandemic, the long-term care side of things came back. So now we have a company with 2 divisions doing work in all of those areas. And honestly, we really are better off because of that pivot. But looking back, the real lesson there was, this is what it is to live by faith. I didn't know where my paycheck was going to come from, but God took care of us. We never went without. We had sufficient for our needs. And I'm so grateful for that opportunity to be tested in the extreme. I think when the pendulum swings really far one way, you get to see it swing the other direction, and you learn what it is to trust at a deeper level. And I'm so thankful for that.
This makes me go a little bit back to your, a little bit of your starting story. Did you come from an entrepreneurial family who had been there, done that? Or were you the first in line?
I did. In fact, I'll give you an example of what it was like growing up, and maybe why I have some of this mindset. I totally credit my parents and their faith. My dad ran his own company. He had a photo processing lab that did a lot of work for professional photographers, large format printing and stuff. So he ran that for 40 years and then sold it to a younger brother who's been running it for about the last 15 years. So we used to talk about business around the dinner table. And there were ups and downs, as every business has. I remember one year, it was the winter time, and my parents had just recently bought some new equipment. It wasn't paying for itself yet. They had done some work, but they hadn't collected on the payments. They had some outstanding receivables. And my dad and my mom used to go down on Sunday nights to turn on some of these pieces of equipment because it would take hours for it to warm up, and they needed it to be ready for Monday morning. And one winter night, they went down to turn on all this equipment. And as they approached the office, the windows were fogged up. And they thought, well, this is strange. What's going on here? And they opened the door, and it was raining in the office. On top of all of this electronic equipment, it was destroying it. And they were at a tough spot because they hadn't taken a paycheck for a couple of months because they had invested in all this new equipment. It wasn't cash flowing yet. And we were fine. But it was a stressful time. And the sermon in church that day literally was about learning to be grateful in all circumstances. And my mom, to her eternal credit, turned to my dad and said, we need to shut off the water first. It turned out that a sprinkler had burst. The pipe had frozen, it just burst. So they turned off the water, and then immediately after, they just dropped to their knees and they just prayed, and they said, we don't know why this is happening, but we are grateful. We're going to be grateful for your hand in this situation and help us know what to do. Well, they got up off their knees. They called their insurance company. As it turned out, the insurance company came through really quickly, and they had loss of use coverage. And so the insurance company gave them a huge payout because they couldn't generate revenue during that time. And literally, that fixed their cash flow problem and set them on a better footing for the next decade. But I'll never forget them coming home from that experience and saying, here's what happened, but we need to pray together and just express our gratitude for this hard thing. We don't know how, but it's Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. So they taught that, and I grew up that way. And that was so helpful as I've gone through some of these wilderness types of experiences.
Yeah. Well, running a business is definitely a faith journey. And I love that story. And it's a good lesson for me. It's not one that is easy to practice sometimes, to be thankful and grateful when things look like they're about to fall apart. And I can only imagine walking into my business and seeing all my new equipment destroyed.
I think people in moments like that, Kurt, sometimes are tempted to look heavenward and say, why are you doing this? And we have these moments where we question things. But if we honestly believe that God is good and that he can do nothing that is not for the benefit of his children, then why would we ever question? And I know that that's way easier said than done. But I think we can be confident that God truly loves us. And sometimes bad things happen just because of other people's misuse of agency or because we made a poor decision. There are all sorts of reasons. And I think we are allowed to have experiences so that we can learn from them. But I believe in a God who makes beauty from ashes, who can look at those situations and say, I can work with this. And we ought to have confidence. We can take him at his word.
Yeah. Krista and I just finished the most recent season of The Chosen. I don't know if have you had a chance to watch this?
Oh, yeah. Sunday nights, that's what we like to do as a family.
Yeah. And one of the biggest takeaways, I don't know how many times I've read the gospel. I mean, sometimes I've read the gospels, all the way through as part of a read the Bible in a year thing. Sometimes I'll do a study of John or whatever. But I bet if we added them all up, it's dozens of times I've perused through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is, for those of you who've never watched it, that's a source material for The Chosen. And I've read all of these conversations between Jesus and the disciples. And the biggest thing that I have noticed when you dramatize it, and I know there's some license in The Chosen with imagination, but one of the biggest things I have gathered is this trusting God thing, which is exactly what you're talking about. And the disciples struggle with this. If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and can do anything, but at the same time, they even into the 11th hour, they're doubting things he says, or they're confused by it. And it's helped me to recognize what it means. It's at various points the disciples say, well, clearly he knows what he's doing, so let's just ask him. And I think, it's a great lesson about trust and being grateful and knowing that in the end, everything is in God's hands and God's control, even when we're at fault. So it's a powerful way, I think, to get into the final part of our show, which is our lightning round. So we like to ask all of our guests 3 questions at the end. We try to force them to answer some tough questions, but only in 60, 90 seconds. And so, but the first one is, when it comes to those final days of your life and you're looking back, how will you know that you've been successful?
I think I'll answer it in 2 ways that are related. One is, if I look back and I know that anything that I did made a difference in an individual's life and brought them more joy and brought them closer to God, then I've done something impactful, and I can feel grateful for that privilege. But ultimately, the yardstick that I'm using to measure is, I feel like we have been truly blessed as a business, and I've been blessed as an individual, to find answers to challenges that a lot of people are having. And I feel like it's a stewardship. I feel like this is a mission that God has given me and my associates. And if we fail to follow through on it, it will be given to another. So ultimately, I want to be able to look back and say, we changed millions of lives, literally millions of people's lives, by allowing them to have a hardware upgrade to make sure that their brains and their bodies are working as well as possible, so that they can trust their emotions better, so that they can experience more joy, so that they can do more of the things that they were put on the planet to do. And that's an exciting thing to contemplate.
And now for something completely different. We like to ask people, what's something that's gotten you down the rabbit hole recently? a hobby, a topic, something that's not related to your day to day, but has you sort of transfixed a little bit?
Mm. Well, the one that immediately comes to mind is something that I have enjoyed since I was a child, and that's music. I started playing the piano when I was 7, saxophone when I was 11. I picked up organ in my early 30s. And I've actually taught music history classes for 25 years just for fun to adult groups. And I've taught at everything from college to independent assisted living facilities. And I still give 2 music history lectures every month. And this last month, I have been deep in the weeds on studying out something that one of my students asked me to talk about, which is how do requiems illustrate the genius of those who compose them. So I've been studying the different requiem masses written by a variety of different composers and how they're an expression of how those composers are literally wrestling with life and death kinds of ideas. So I've been listening to all this amazing music written over the centuries and really going deep on what those composers were thinking about, trying to accomplish, and how they were trying to bring together complex musical forms. And it has been just a delightful subject to dig into for the last few weeks.
Interesting. I in college we did art history, but I've never really, other than just the enjoying classical music, never really dug into music history. You might have sparked an interest in me here. Well, to end, I would like you to imagine that 90 seconds was the only part of this show that anyone listened to. What should they know about you, about A Mind for All Seasons? Who should be reaching out to you? What can you do for them?
All of us have a brain. It's the only one that we'll ever get. And it's like the control tower for everything that happens in the body. It controls our emotions. It controls our ability to think and process and to deliver and to move. It affects everything about us. And brain health is never about one thing. It's multimodal. It's affected by our hormones. It's affected by what we eat. It's affected by the quality of our sleep and a whole lot of other things. And my team and I have developed a very organized process to measure the things related to your brain health and to leverage the latest research that shows how all of those things are affecting us to make very personalized recommendations that are precise about exactly what you can do to optimize those different factors so that ultimately you can get way better results today as far as your energy, your performance, your ability to show up from day to day for the people that you care about most. And the fringe benefit of it is most of the top researchers in the Alzheimer's world now recognize that that disease is largely preventable, but the pathology starts decades before symptoms show up. So we help people have a better brain today and prevent things like Alzheimer's disease downstream so that they can spend the rest of their life making the difference that they were put on the planet to make, so that they can serve others at a deeper level and get better results all the way around. I think it is the advantage, especially in an AI-driven world. So if anyone wants to know more about the enhanced protocol, my team and I would be honored to serve anybody that wants to leave the sick care system, quit waiting for the wheels to fall off the bus and hope that their doctor has a magic pill, and start being proactive in taking care of this stewardship that we have for our bodies.
Well, this is powerful. And for those of you who have really resonated with what Eric's talking about, you can hit him up at www.amindforallseasons.com and learn more about their company, how to work with them. Is there any other place where people could reach you?
I think one thing that people could do is if you go to amindforallseasons.com/energy, you could take a free brain energy self-assessment that's going to ask you questions about lifestyle. It's going to ask you questions about any symptoms that you might be noticing that you may not even connect to your brain health, but it'll help you learn that. And then it'll ask about certain biomarkers in case you've had any blood work done. And at the end of that, it'll give you some insights as to how am I doing? So I'd invite anybody to participate in that. And of course, I'm I'm on all the social media channels, Eric D. Collett, Collett.
Awesome. Well, I encourage people to go there, amindforallseasons.com/energy, and learn about that. It's been so wonderful to have you and to learn from you. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for doing so. And we invite you to join our Liberty Partnership community at libertyspenders.com. Also, you can learn from our new book, which we talked about, which you can get today at libertyspenders.com/free. But probably the most important thing is if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share it with friends and family so we can get this message out. Until next time. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Liberty Spenders Podcast. If you're a business owner, we hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights on how to grow your business.
If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more entrepreneurs and leaders like you who are ready to make an impact.
And write something flattering, because I read them all. Don't forget to grab your copy of Liberty Spenders too, available now on Amazon and at libertyspenders.com. It's packed with proven strategies to help you reach the 76.5 million consumers who are looking for brands that share their values.
We'll see you next time as we continue exploring how to grow your business with purpose and conviction.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode and the one after that.